You beat me here. You're quick.
Hey,
Hey. All right. Looks like we already have a few people actually trying to speak.
wonderful.
So welcome to everybody. Thank you for tuning in. I hope you got to see Rachel's presentation on the blue stage just now. I'm gonna feel free to hop up on stage with us. So it looks like a few people have already requested to do that. So I'll try to let them in. But in the meantime, I'll take some questions from the chat box as well. It looks like we have another question from Rob and Catherine, which is on ecotourism. And do you have any trips planned in the future with MarAlliance?
Yes, absolutely. So ecotourism, just as a quick answer, is one of the major or one of the key alternatives to fishing in a lot of fishing communities, coastal communities throughout all the countries we work in. So that's been heavily hit, severely affected, especially because travel has been so restricted to those countries. However, we are hoping that in 2021, things are going to be able to come back to the extent where, excuse me, MarAlliance will be running its bespoke expeditions where it's very immersive. We bring people into our team of partner fishers and more, and we do the long-term monitoring that we've shared with a lot of people in previous presentations and on our social media. So we have great plans for 2021. We'll see how travel looks, etc. But starting, I would say in April 2021 is when we really hope to get started with a lot of our expeditions again. And we hope that that's going to kickstart ecotourism for a lot of the coastal communities as well.
Absolutely. All right. So it looks like we have a few people here in the booth with us. So Don Drake, if you have any questions for Rachel, let me unmute you.
Hello, Don.
Hold on.
You're still on mute.
Should be. There you go, Don.
Okay. Sorry, I was just typing a question. I was curious if you have any thoughts on what the most important unanswered research questions are that could aid the conservation that you do.
So we've got some key questions. I think one of the biggest things is going to be, I guess, how best a lot of the conservation that we're trying to angle towards, especially for sharks, is the conservation of nursery sites for sharks and rays. So how best can we actually preserve these sites, and how can we minimize mortality from fishing gears at those sites and beyond as they grow up into different stages of their life cycle. So those are some of the key things that we're trying to answer. We're also trying to see how effective are the marine protected areas that are actually being created in protecting sharks and rays at different stages of their lives. And we're really behind compared to our terrestrial analogs, because we're still gathering a lot of basic information and trying to merge that with understanding of marine protected area effectiveness. We have a lot of work to do, especially if the world is hoped for 30% coverage of marine protected areas by 2030.
Awesome. Thank you, Rachel. And thanks, Don, for a good question.
Thanks, Don.
So it looks like Paulita, who's joining us here, she had a
Hello, Paulita.
She had a question about mangroves in Belize. So Paulita, I'll actually let you do the talking. You can ask Rachel.
Sure. So one thing that I'm interested in is, rebuilding mangrove ecosystems through Belize, the need to protect them, first of all, but also to rebuild in several of the communities that I've worked in. And I wonder if MarAlliance has a position or works at all within aquaculture, because I'm thinking maybe there is an opportunity to transition some folks into aquaculture if it's done sustainably, because that could help with mangroves and potentially help with protecting and having sustainable wild fish stocks as well as creating a new revenue stream for some coastal communities. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Great, thank you, Paulita. So mangroves are absolutely essential, and for those who may not be aware of how essential they are, apart from mitigating coastal erosion, minimizing impacts of storms, and of course we know those are becoming more potent over time, especially with climate change, mangroves are key fish nursery areas. And we're actually really lucky in Belize compared to a lot of other countries because we still have very strong mangrove coverage. And this is something that actually was highlighted recently by Dr. Emil Charrington, who is Belizean, who's done incredible work in mapping mangroves, but we are losing them, and especially to coastal development. So to answer your question, we are increasingly looking at critical habitat preservation. And in fact, funnily you should say, we're starting a project together with the Key-Caulker community in part in order to promote mangrove restoration, because many of them have actually been taken, have been uprooted there. And with respect to, I think we're more interested in seeing how we can restore and keep these absolutely critical nursery habitats for a whole host of juvenile fish, including sharks and rays, but especially a lot of the commercially important fish, as opposed to looking specifically at aquaculture. Now, we recognize that aquaculture is becoming increasingly important in tropical countries and throughout the world. It is actually providing over 54% of our protein, and it is actually providing more sea protein than wild counterparts, which is great. However, my biggest issues with agriculture, and I want to mention them here because a lot of people don't realize, fish that are being raised need to feed on something. And often for them to taste like fish, they're fed fish. So where do those fish come from? So you pull the rug out from one ecosystem in one country to feed fish in another country in the aquacultural cycle. So a lot of people ask us whether or not we want to move fishers more towards aquaculture. My feeling is, let's try and see how we can really focus on habitat preservation first and foremost, change some of the fishing gears, diversify economies, and move from there. And my final point on that too is that because aquaculture in Belize, you've had, for example, tilapia as an aquacultural species. Now tilapia have escaped from a lot of their aquacultural areas, from the ponds, and are displacing, this has been several years in the making, are displacing the native cichlids. So you're actually impoverishing the biodiversity of the riverine fish species in Belize as a result. I could go on about that, but I think I'll keep it short there.
Rachel, I wanted to actually let you introduce someone we have here in the group with us, Jamal, on your team. I know you don't work as alone, so why don't you actually introduce Jamal to the rest of the crowd?
I would love to. Well, everybody, I'd love to introduce you to our education and outreach specialist, Jamal Andrew and Bone, who is based in Belize as we chat here. And Jamal, why don't you tell us a little bit about what we have planned in education? Because I gave you a shout out in terms of what you said when you trialed the virtual reality program, and you got mind blown. So where do we go from here? And I also see that we have our technical coordinators joined us as well. Awesome. Ivy Paramore with her young son, who of course loves sharks, of course. So Jamal, tell us a little bit about where we're going next in terms of education in a kind of a currently pandemic situation, and then hopefully post-pandemic.
Thank you for the introduction, Rachel, and Tommy as well for sharing the stage. As Rachel's shared brilliantly, we had such a wonderful impact with the beginnings of our virtual reality outreach program. It blew minds, as you've rightfully said, and it was right on the eve of the pandemic as far as its impacts on Belize. So a lot of our in-person experiential learning programs have had to be temporarily put on hold. But what's been encouraging is that the commitment to education has not faltered, even if the means of delivering it has been challenged and has had to be rerouted. So we've managed to find creative ways to remain in contact with many of our stakeholders in education, the educators, school administrators, people at the government level, and even families, parents and children who are trying to ensure that their children receive education through distance learning. And so we've been in a position to explore ways to support that remotely. For example, our teams in Honduras have managed to create lesson plans that support the learning objectives, the school curricula for the different schools under the Ministry of Education. Obviously with a take on shark and marine education. So they've been novel, they've been fun, interactive, but are still in line with what teachers have to achieve on a daily basis. So they've been very warmly received. They're not giving the teachers more work, they're just giving them more tools through which to achieve their goals in the classroom through distance learning. So that's been one in that we've had as MarAlliance. The other thing we're looking at now is we've crafted and we're on the verge of launching a countrywide survey in Belize, Honduras, and Panama to get really meaningful insight from the teachers as far as what the challenges were in delivering classroom learning before COVID, during, and as well as what the presence of marine conservation is in their curricula, like how deep is it, how meaningful, how well connected it is, to give us more insight as to how we can help them fill those gaps as MarAlliance, how we can give them additional tools that are useful, that are empowering to their students when they try to connect them with the marine environment. So this is where we're using our strengths to really support our education stakeholders in a meaningful way. And apart from that, it's also an opportunity to give them their voice on a public stage, much like we're doing here at the WCN Expo. We've had some wonderful, very passionate educators from Honduras that have done live sessions with our team, answering these kind of thought-provoking questions. And we'll be extending that not only to the formal educators, but to our partners that work with non-governmental entities that do a lot of informal or environmental education here in Belize. And of course, also parents who are now educators in their own right, trying to achieve distance learning in their households. A lot of them without previous experience as formal educators are now thrust into this position and really stepping up to the platform and finding innovative ways to ensuring that their children are learning meaningfully. So we'll be able to get insight from them as well as to how they do this best and share these successes, these opportunities, these solutions with others that may be struggling or need more guidance on how to achieve the same goals.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
I'd love to, I know you have a lot of questions as well, and you have been stacking up some questions. Maybe we can answer some questions, and then I'd love to have Ivy tell us a little bit about some of where the fisheries work is going as well.
Of course, yeah. I think Ivy might actually be able to help with this question too, so you can introduce her. But we have a question from Talia, and she asked, with ecotourism, since it's relatively new for the marine world, how do we tackle unethical marine tourism? Like people riding on a whale shark, for example. Could the fishing community in Belize potentially transition to more sustainable ecotourism? So why don't you tell us about
that? Yeah, should I talk about that? The ecotourism? Okay. So I think one of the things with ecotourism, especially with marine megafauna, you're starting to see actually a concerted trend throughout the world, not just in Belize, but in all countries, to not only develop very strong, robust guidelines for wildlife encounters at sea, be they whales, whale sharks, etc., but also I found that social media has been an exceptionally good way of shaming people who actually do bad behaviors. And it goes viral, and what you're seeing as a response from people is also a mind shift in people where somebody's found riding a whale shark, they're shamed. That is really not the thing to do. So I think that this is actually happening organically worldwide. Belize is ahead of the curve compared to a lot of countries. They have a really well developed ecotourism structure, and they've been conducting wildlife encounter ecotourism. And I helped develop the whale shark one early on in 2000, trained a lot of fishers into guides, trained hundreds of guides how to do responsible and safe wildlife encounter tourism, especially with whale sharks, but with other marine megafauna. So I'd say we were a really good example for many other countries, and I'm so impressed that so many other countries have adopted good guidelines.
All right. Thank you. Do you want to introduce Ivy then?
Yeah, well, what I wanted to introduce Ivy for is because Don was talking a little bit about fish, and Paulita as well with aquaculture. But one of the key things that we're seeing in the fisheries, for example, in the Mesoamerican reef, so that's Mexico, Belize, Guatemala, and Honduras, is that as nearshore fish stocks are declining, you're seeing fishers saying, okay, where are we going to go? So years ago, I was going, well, crap, you're seeing an increasing trend towards moving into deep sea. And also that's the big unknown in terms of sharks and rays. That's kind of the next frontier. What do we have down there? We now have 540 species of shark, but we keep finding new ones, and often they're in the deep sea. So that's when Ivy joined us, and I remember I asked her, what drives you? What gets you so excited? What would you like to focus your life on? And she's like, oh, deep sea sharks. And so that became the start of the Deep Sea Fisheries and Sharks program. And Ivy's just been knocking it out of the park. So Ivy, you want to tell us a little bit more about the program and what you're doing with that, and how you're looking at the whole aspects of this project?
Sure, thank you. Yes, as you mentioned, we had a great foundation to build on because you had sort of seen that coming before I even came onto the program, and so we started just by talking to fishermen and asking questions about deep sea, and the more kind of we poked at it and asked questions, the more we realized that this was actually a pretty big deal, deep sea fisheries. And you don't realize in our area in the Mesoamerican Reef, when you see the beautiful Belize Barrier Reef and the Mesoamerican Barrier Reef, just past that, if you take a boat directly out past it, you drop into thousands of feet of water very quickly. So these deep sea fisheries are just right there. So that doesn't take huge boats. It doesn't take big crew that goes out for weeks at a time. You can go out for a day and come back with a couple 100 pounds of fish from the deep sea. And so we started to look into that. And we also, as Rachel mentioned, of course, we like sharks and rays. And so we're curious, and we realized that we have really no idea what's in the deep sea here. There are some anecdotal records, but for the most part, when you look at the books and you look at all of the, when you look for identification, there's a big question mark in the deep sea, especially in this area. So that really got us very curious. So we did start looking at, we went primarily looking for sharks, but then of course we're also seeing the fish. And then my background is actually in the government fisheries in the US. And so I started thinking, well, how vulnerable are these fish to overfishing as well? How many fish are being removed? Nobody's really taking that into account. There's no regulation, there's no management. So we started to investigate the fish that are being caught in these fisheries as well. And that has turned into this multinational research project that we've been working on for now, 4 years, almost 5 years now. And so we've got some really interesting data, and we've been working directly with the fishing community. Excuse me.
It's called multitasking.
Yes. We do have our Sharkies represented as well. Oh, and we also just recently got a ray, which is we think it's
representing 650 species. Well done.
We're confused about the pelvic fins, but we'll address that at another time. So yeah, this really an exciting project. It's a lot of firsts. We're about to put out a paper on the perceptions of the fishers in the fishery, and sort of the history and the differences this is a pretty small region, and there are pretty big differences just among countries that are neighboring. So we have lots and lots of questions that we're trying to answer. There's from sharks to fish, to everything else. And so it's a really exciting project.
And it's really timely too. I just want to jump in because as I said, a lot of fishers, you're starting to see them moving over into the deep, and we don't know where the spawning aggregations are. We don't know where most of the hot spots are, and they're fishing the deep faster than we can get the information. And we're just trying to be precautionary in our approach, because we already know that a lot of the nearshore fisheries have been severely depleted. So a lot of our work, it tends to be very innovative, precautionary, and well ahead of the curve.
Exactly. And it is, you do see when you ask the fishers, why are you fishing in the deep sea? Well, a lot of them are just curious. It's the reason why they started. They're explorers at heart. Fishermen love to be the first to see something. And so that's one of the first things that gets them into it. But then, probably half of them said, well, it's just, there's nothing else that we can do, or there's not fish in the near shore anymore. So it's become more and more important as the coastal fisheries have been noticeably and documented to be decreasing.
Thanks, Ivy. Yeah, it's awesome to have your input. Incredible project. I wanted to ask both of you, I think, and then I'll pass it to Don because he has another question. But before we get there, I wanted to ask both of you, how the heck do you manage being a shark conservationist while you're a mother at home as well? I know, Rachel, you have two of your own. How have you survived the past 6-7 months in COVID at home with your boys? You're muted, Rachel.
So the moderator keeps muting me. Would that be you?
No, you're good now.
We're good. Okay, fabulous. So this is really the longest period of time that I've been without travel. It is also the longest period of time that I have spent with my children, without being apart from my children, months and months and months. And let me tell you, I still love them. Apparently they still love me, but I think we're really due a break fairly soon. I am in some ways lucky because they're older, they're 12 and 17. I think it's been more challenging for several of our other team members, especially Ivy. Ivy, have you managed to maintain your sanity?
Coming back, I think. You say you're lucky because they're older. I'm actually a little bit lucky because he's young, so we don't have to do virtual school. So that's been one thing. We're also lucky because we've been very flexible with our working. So actually, the reason why I'm the primary giver today is because my husband does the lion's share of the childcare during the week when we don't have childcare. We've recently been able to get someone to come to the house and watch him a couple of days a week. So on the weekends, he gets to not have the baby full time. So we're also close to nap time, which is why he's being a little bit clingy. But no, yeah, I think the first few months were a bit of a shock. We also, kids this age, they do a lot of transitions. And so we're, you're rolling with do we go to one nap from 2? And we're thinking about potty training and things like that. And we're home all the time with them. So it is, as Rachel said, we spend a lot of time. It's a bit of a blessing in disguise because I never would have been able to spend this much time with them at this age, but it is a lot. It's a lot.
Of course.
No, I think I'm really happy for you, to tell you the truth, Ivy, because I missed out on 1/3 of Zavi's childhood up to the age of 2. And then after that, I was gone 3 to 4 months every year in the field. And as soon as he was old enough, I was able to integrate him into field work as best as I could. I have little videos of him releasing Goliath grouper in Belize and helping me catch sharks and all the rest, which I'm sure Ben will be doing as well. But I think this is a really important thing for folks to know who might be here with us at the moment, is that if you want to be a field-oriented conservationist, biologist, it's very hard on women, and you have these two loves. You love your child, but you also love the field. It's part of who you are. And finding ways to better support that so that you can keep, especially women, in conservation science, that's critical, because our voices matter. And a lot of the times when we have children, we are almost pushed out of this field. And that's something that I want to make sure through MarAlliance we don't do, and we're supportive of women who work with us and who have babies and who want to remain in field science as well.
That's wonderful. Thank you, guys. Yeah, I applaud both of you as well. Well, I think Don is sitting down, so I'll let him share it. Don's lucky enough to be in Hawaii right now, but the recent experience with shark finning. So, Don, I'll let you ask a question.
Yeah, we just had in the news recently a case of a commercial boat that was seized for shark finning, and there was a small fine, and the crew were jailed for 5 days, and then everybody was released. And I think this is a general thing that the penalties for wildlife crime are not very severe, and what are the prospects, especially say for shark fisheries and rays? What are the prospects for getting some real teeth in the penalties for people who violate the regulations?
So I think, and I'll share this with Ivy, my take on this is that, yes, it is incredibly challenging to exert stiff penalties for sharks and rays, and primarily because clearly they are caught, if not targeted, then bycatch as part of a general fishery. So that means that you have to either be very selective in your fishery, and then you have to have a lot of oversight and control. So if Hawaii in the US is having issues, imagine what the rest of tropical countries is like. And this is really where we have some serious challenges. And this is, again, why that proposed ban on nets in Belize could be so momentous, because it's very difficult to, for example, say, okay, we're going to manage the number of nets each fisher can have, the mesh size, etc. Well, who's going to control that? You can't. So really, you need very easy, simple ways to be able to enforce management measures. And in the case of Belize, one of the easiest ways is actually to ban nets. Now, clearly, we can't do that everywhere, but I think simplification, a lot of the time, simplification of management measures and laws, that's one, because there's so many overlapping laws, it's very confusing. And I think two is raising the priorities in governments for sharks and rays. They're not as much of a priority as a range of other species, and that is contributing to their demise. It doesn't help that they have bad PR as well. Ivy, you've worked a lot with NOAA and in fisheries. What's your take on it?
Yeah, I think you pretty well nailed it. You have to have government will for it to be a top-down effect. The only other way that it works is the bottom-down effect, which is that the pressure comes from the stakeholders, the resource users, and that takes just as much effort, which is the community that we work with. And so if you have the resource users who understand the stakes and they see their own eyes how things are changing and how their actions can help to improve things, then that's the best way. When you have, with a lack of government will, when it's not going to come down from the top, you have to start from the bottom. You have to start from the ground up.
And I would say another thing is we've seen how, for example, dolphin-safe tuna, it might not always be safe, but that changed people's minds. It really changed people's behaviors. And then by consumer choice, people started becoming informed and choosing certain types of tuna over others. That's kind of where we need to get to with some of this work as well. It would be amazing if one day we have a shark-safe tuna or shark-safe fisheries, etc. And I think we're getting there. We're seeing tremendous changes in attitudes, perceptions, and desire to steward sharks as compared to 10 years ago. But again, it comes down also to government will.
Thank you, Don, for a good question.
Thank you.
All right. Well, unfortunately, we're pretty much out of time. We have time for one more question, which is going to be from Robert. And then we'll have to say goodbye to Rachel and Ivy. And thank you to Don and Paulita for hopping on stage with us, and Jamal, of course, too. But But the last question from Robert, Rachel, and Ivy is, how can the audience get their very own MarAlliance water bottle too?
Well, as soon as
Like a
we can.
MarAlliance water bottle.
Well, guess what? I don't even have one. I mean, they only go to the top of the top, you know, like Tommy. So we're hoping that we're actually going to be creating a store before the end of the year that'll be linked to our MarAlliance page. And that's where we also hope to have the MOLA masks, and we have incredible designs for t-shirts and all kinds of other things. And we really hope that people will be purchasing some of these things, because every little bit helps us drive our conservation projects in the field and with coastal fishing communities. So stand by. We're trying to make it happen before Christmas.
Awesome. And I just dropped the link for the MOLA masks in the chat box.
Oh, thank you so much. Much appreciated.
Of course. All right. Well, I wish we had more time. I could dive into marine stuff all day with you guys. But for the
we have a booth. We have a booth.
Yes, you have a booth, so please feel free to visit MarAlliance's booth under the exhibitors tab, where you can type questions to Rachel. And 15 minutes, 13 minutes to be exact. We're going to have an interview from Jane Goodall on the main stage, so make sure you guys tune into that. It should be really fascinating. But for now, I just wanted to say thank you to Rachel and Ivy and the whole MarAlliance team. You guys are wonderful. So keep your heads up and keep up the great work.
Thanks, Tommy. Thanks for moderating. Thank you, everybody. Dawn, Kalisa, and everybody who joined us today.
Bye, guys.
Say bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, Ben.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Oh. All right, I'll finish it there.
All right, thanks.